They say forgiveness is divine, but what if I told you that endless forgiveness can actually destroy an empath's soul? For years, you've been told that saying I forgive you makes you noble, spiritual, even stronger. But here's the paradox. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't heal, it hides the truth. And when the empath finally stops forgiving, something extraordinary happens. Masks fall, hidden intentions surface, and the raw, unfiltered truth emerges in a way that changes everything. Carl Jung believed that what we refuse to see in others, their masks, their shadows, eventually poisons our own spirit. Think about it. How many times have you excused toxic behavior, hoping love or patience would transform it? How many times have you silenced your pain to keep the peace? Empaths do this more than anyone, and it leaves them drained, trapped in cycles that feel impossible to escape. But here's the shocking twist. The moment you stop excusing and start seeing, the world around you begins to rearrange itself. This isn't about bitterness. It's about awakening. And the fastest way to reclaim your power as an empath is not by forgiving endlessly, but by daring to see clearly. That clarity unlocks a kind of freedom you've been craving for years. By the end of this video, you'll understand why stopping the cycle of blind forgiveness is not the end of compassion. It's the beginning of healing, of individuation, of becoming fully and authentically you. Imagine a person who spends years swallowing small resentments, always giving in, believing that keeping the peace is more important than speaking their own truth. They smile on the outside, but inside they hold wounds no one else can see. This is one of the clearest signs you're an empath, feeling the pain of others so deeply that your own pain becomes invisible. But there comes a moment when the body, the mind, and even the soul begin to scream enough. It's like an internal alarm going off, whispering, something has to change, or you will lose yourself. Many people would call this extreme sensitivity, but in reality, it's what empath psychology describes as the natural tendency to absorb the emotions of others. Someone makes a harsh comment. The empath keeps it inside. A toxic pattern repeats. They forgive, hoping tomorrow will be different. What few realize is that this pattern can even be identified in a simple empath test. The inability to say no and the excessive forgiveness are both obvious signs of a heart that gives without limits. Carl Jung often reminded us that behind every smile there may be a mask, the persona. This persona helps us adapt socially, but it can also push us away from our true selves. When the empath forgives without boundaries, they unintentionally feed the persona of others. They accept the role of peacemaker and uphold the mask that hides others' true intentions, while their own shadow is neglected. In that sense, the practice of shadow work becomes essential, because it is the only way to face what lies hidden in the unconscious mind. Here's the twist. Many empaths confuse compassion with submission. They believe that giving in is an act of love, when in truth, it can be an act of self-abandonment. This confusion often comes from unresolved wounds, rooted in the fragile bond between the inner child and empaths. When we don't heal the trauma and empathy patterns we inherited from childhood, we repeat them in adulthood, asking for less than we deserve and accepting more than we can handle. And so, the empath gets stuck in cycles of maintaining toxic relationships under the illusion that it's all an expression of goodness. But sooner or later, the empath begins to notice the signs of exhaustion. Sleepless nights, restless thoughts, and even moments of synchronicity that feel like warnings from the universe, urging a shift. And then comes the inevitable question, the one that pierces through the fog. What happens when the empath stops forgiving and finally sees the masks falling? That question is the turning point, and it leads us directly into the next theme, the cycle of endless forgiveness. An empath's story often begins with the same familiar pattern, carrying the weight of other people's mistakes and forgiving them again and again. They believe that if they offer enough grace, maybe the other person will finally change. But this cycle becomes a trap. Each act of forgiveness feels noble, yet it chips away at their sense of self. It's like pouring from a cup that is never refilled. Eventually, it runs dry. And when it does, The empath is left staring at their reflection, wondering when they stopped recognizing the person in the mirror. This endless loop of excusing toxic behavior creates emotional exhaustion. Imagine working overtime every single day and never receiving payment. That's how an empath feels when they keep giving forgiveness to someone who never takes responsibility. The toll is not only psychological but also physical. Stress builds, the body aches, and the spirit grows weary. According to analytical psychology, what is happening here is a misalignment between the persona, the mask others wear, and the empath's inner truth. The empath sees the mask, but chooses to ignore it, hoping it hides something better. Jungian psychology reminds us that masks are not always lies. Sometimes they are survival tools. Yet, when an empath keeps forgiving blindly, they maintain these masks for others instead of letting them fall. Think of it this way: if someone constantly shows up with excuses, and we keep accepting them, we are the ones keeping their disguise intact. This is why shadow work and empath healing journey become so important. They help the empath notice not just the toxic person, but their own role in sustaining the illusion. There's also a connection between trauma and empathy that makes this cycle so hard to break. Many empaths learned early in life that love must be earned by enduring pain. So, when faced with toxic people as adults, they repeat the same bargain. If I forgive, maybe I'll finally be loved. This is why understanding the inner child and empath's dynamic is crucial. Healing begins when they realize they don't need to keep sacrificing themselves to prove their worth. They can love deeply without abandoning their own needs. But here's the paradox. While forgiveness is a beautiful quality, without emotional boundaries it becomes self-destruction. The empath eventually discovers that unconditional forgiveness toward toxic patterns is not kindness, it's permission. And each time they say yes to being hurt, they are really saying no to themselves. This realization sets the stage for a dramatic shift, a moment where something inside whispers, "Enough." And that whisper leads directly into the next chapter, the moment of transformation, when the empath finally says no. There comes a day when the empath's patience finally runs out. It's not an explosion of anger or a dramatic confrontation. It's a quiet but firm realization that they can no longer play the same role. Picture a person who has always carried everyone's bags at the airport. One day, their arms ache too much, and they finally set them down. That simple act of saying no shocks everyone around them. For the empath, this is the moment when the soul speaks louder than the habit. This no isn't rejection or cruelty. It's self-preservation. In empath psychology, this is the moment where healing truly begins. By refusing to forgive endlessly, the empath acknowledges their worth. It's the voice of the inner child saying, "I've had enough of being overlooked." Jung would call this the meeting of the shadow, the hidden anger, resentment, and fatigue finally surfacing. The empath doesn't want revenge. They want balance. And balance begins with boundaries. What's fascinating is how relationships shift at this exact point. Some people respect the new boundary, even if they don't understand it. Others react with shock, confusion, or even hostility, because they've lost the privilege of endless forgiveness. Here, the teachings of analytical psychology help us see what's happening. The mask, or persona, is slipping. By no longer feeding it, the empath forces the truth into the open. And once seen, truth cannot be unseen. Of course, breaking this cycle isn't easy. The empath often struggles with guilt, feeling like they are betraying their nature by saying no. But guilt is just a sign that the old pattern is dissolving. The empath healing journey requires courage to face this discomfort. Think of it like learning to walk again after years of limping, awkward at first, but each step builds strength. This is where shadow work becomes a compass, guiding them to embrace both compassion and self-respect. And here's the beauty. When the empath stops excusing toxic patterns, they don't lose their kindness, they refine it. They discover that love without emotional boundaries isn't love at all, it's self-erasure. This turning point doesn't destroy relationships. It reveals which ones were genuine and which ones thrived only on exploitation. And once the masks begin to fall, the empath steps into a whole new clarity, one that leads directly into the next chapter, seeing the truth behind the masks. When the empath finally steps back from blind forgiveness, something remarkable happens. The world around them starts to look different. It's not that people suddenly change, it's that the fog clears and their true faces are revealed. Some individuals react with shock, as if the empaths know pulled away their disguise. Others retreat, uncomfortable with being seen for who they really are. This unveiling can be painful, but it's also liberating. The empath learns that truth was always there, hidden beneath layers of performance. Carl Jung described this process as individuation, the journey of becoming more authentic by integrating shadow and light. For the empath, this means no longer carrying relationships built on illusions. By refusing to play the role of silent forgiver, they force others to reveal their real selves. This is where analytical psychology offers insight. The empath is no longer enabling the persona of others. Instead, they are witnessing the split between who someone pretends to be and who they truly are. It's almost like wiping steam off a mirror. For years, the empath could only see blurred outlines, assuming the best in everyone. But once the mirror clears, they recognize patterns they ignored before: manipulation, dishonesty, or genuine kindness that now shines brighter without distortion. This is where synchronicity often enters, strange coincidences or events that seem to confirm the new awareness. The universe whispers, "You were right to see differently." But this clarity isn't without cost. Some relationships end. Others transform dramatically. Friends or family who were once comfortable exploiting the empath's endless patience may lash out, accusing them of being cold or selfish. Yet this is simply projection, an attempt to put the mask back on. For the empath, this stage requires resilience and firm emotional boundaries. It's the recognition that losing a false connection is not loss at all, but a step toward freedom. And with each mask that falls, the empath grows closer to their true self. They begin to understand that authenticity requires courage, and that compassion doesn't mean tolerating harm. This is the raw power of shadow work and empath healing journey. The discovery that wholeness is worth more than approval. The fog clears, the illusions dissolve, and the empath stands face to face with reality. And though the truth can sting, it prepares the heart for the next revelation, the liberation that only truth can bring. The truth is rarely gentle, but it always sets us free. When the empath finally stops forgiving without limits, they see clearly that endless pardon isn't compassion, it's self-abandonment. It's like realizing you've been pouring water into a bucket with holes at the bottom. No matter how much you give, nothing changes. Suddenly, the empath notices every ignored phone call, every fake apology, every "I'll do better next time" that never turned into action. Forgiveness without accountability is no longer seen as noble. It becomes a mirror of how little value was being given to their own worth. Take the workplace, for instance. An empath might constantly cover for a coworker who misses deadlines, forgiving them week after week, hoping kindness will inspire change. But nothing shifts, except the empath's stress levels. Projects pile up, resentment builds, and health suffers. When they finally say, "I can't keep doing your part," the truth emerges. The coworker was never incapable, they were simply relying on the empath's endless patience. Boundaries become the only way to restore balance. The same pattern unfolds in family life. Think of the parent who continuously forgives an adult child's reckless behavior, financial irresponsibility, broken promises, disrespect. For years, the empath excuses it, believing love means tolerance. But one day, they realize love without emotional boundaries isn't love, it's enabling. By finally saying, "No more bailouts until you take responsibility," the parent shifts from blind forgiveness to tough love. That shift doesn't diminish compassion, it strengthens it, because it allows genuine accountability to grow. Friendships can carry this truth as well. The empath is always the listener, the comforter, the one who shows up at 2 a.m. when everyone else is too tired. Yet, When the empath needs support, the room is empty. For years, they forgive this imbalance, convincing themselves, maybe my friends just don't notice. But when the empath stops accepting crumbs, they see clearly, a real friend gives back. The masks fall, and the truth emerges. Some relationships were never friendships at all, just convenient one-sided exchanges. Romantic relationships often magnify this cycle. An empath might forgive repeated betrayals, harsh words, or neglect, hoping that love will eventually heal the wounds. But love without respect becomes a cage. When the empath finally stops forgiving excuses and demands mutual effort, they discover the truth. Some partners only stay when they can take advantage of unchecked forgiveness. This realization is painful, but liberating. It shows that staying silent for love was never love. It was fear of loss. And true intimacy can only grow where honesty and accountability live. Carl Jung would see this awakening as the moment when the empath integrates shadow and light. The anger that surfaces is not destructive, it is instructive. It signals that the self is reclaiming ground once surrendered. In Jungian psychology, this is individuation in action, the conscious mind finally aligning with the unconscious mind. The empath embraces the part of themselves that demands respect, without losing the part that offers kindness. It is balance, not bitterness. Of course, this shift is not without struggle. Old habits resurface. The empath may still feel guilty for saying no, as if they are betraying their identity. At work, they might worry about seeming unhelpful. In family, they may fear being called selfish. In relationships, they may dread being abandoned. Yet, guilt is simply the echo of the old pattern dying. The empath healing journey demands courage to sit with this guilt, to remember that boundaries don't break love, they reveal whether love was real to begin with. Even the body reflects this truth. Once forgiveness without limits ends, stress begins to lift. Migraines ease. Sleep returns. The empath notices how their energy shifts when they are no longer surrounded by takers. This is the quiet miracle of healing for empaths. When the inner child stops reliving trauma, the adult self finally feels free. And this freedom isn't abstract. It's practical. They say no to extra work, no to manipulative family drama, no to draining relationships. Each no is a yes to their own health. The paradox of truth is that while it may cost relationships, it deepens the ones that remain. Those who value the empath adapt to the new boundaries. They learn to respect, to give back, to grow. Others who cannot handle the truth drift away. The empath sees clearly now. Losing those connections isn't loss, it's release. They are no longer chained to illusions. They are free to build bonds rooted in reciprocity. This is where synchronicity often shows up. New people arrive who match the empath's newfound strength, almost as if the universe had been waiting for this shift. And so, the truth that emerges is not just revelation, it's transformation. The empath realizes that forgiveness is not a blanket to cover every wound, but a sacred tool to use wisely. Love isn't about carrying the weight of everyone else's mistakes. It's about walking together in honesty. Setting boundaries doesn't close the heart. It opens the door to real connection. And with every step in this direction, the empath embodies the essence of individuation, living authentically, loving wisely, and protecting their soul. This clarity leads to the final reflection, the deeper awakening of what it truly means to turn inward. Carl Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens." For the empath, this truth resonates louder than any other. After years of gazing outward, trying to manage the emotions of others, the real awakening happens when they dare to look within. That inward glance is not always comfortable. It stirs up shadows, reveals wounds, and challenges the illusions they've clung to. But it is precisely in that discomfort that transformation begins. The empath learns that peace doesn't come from endlessly forgiving others, but from finally forgiving themselves for neglecting their own needs. This awakening isn't about vengeance. It's not about keeping score or shutting people out of your life. It's about reclaiming the essence of who you are without apology. Imagine an empath who once stayed silent in heated arguments, just to keep harmony. Now, instead of shrinking, they speak calmly but firmly. That's not acceptable to me. This is not an attack, it's authenticity. And authenticity is what Jung would call individuation, the merging of the conscious self with the unconscious, creating wholeness. The empath discovers that true harmony is built on honesty, not silence. The empath also realizes that boundaries are not walls, they are doors with locks, and the key is in their hands. When they choose to open the door, it's out of trust, not obligation. For example, in friendships, they no longer feel guilty declining invitations that drain them. At work, they stop volunteering for every task just to keep the peace. In family, they recognize that saying no doesn't mean abandonment. It means protecting their energy so they can show up in healthier ways. These everyday acts become proof that self-respect and compassion can coexist. What's profound here is the shift in perspective. The empath begins to see that their sensitivity is not a weakness, but a compass. Those intense emotions they once considered burdens now serve as guides. When they feel drained, it's a signal to set boundaries. When they sense joy in someone's presence, it's a sign of alignment. This is the wisdom of empath psychology. Emotions are not obstacles. They are messages from the unconscious mind. The empath learns to interpret these signals as a map for living authentically. And it's not just about survival, it's about growth. Through shadow work, the empath sees how their inner child still longs for safety, approval, and love. Instead of ignoring those needs, they finally embrace them. They say to themselves, "I see you, I hear you, I will protect you." This healing dialogue creates a powerful shift. The empath no longer seeks validation in toxic people because they have become their own anchor. The cycle of trauma and empathy begins to dissolve, replaced with the deeper strength of self-trust. One of the most beautiful outcomes of this process is synchronicity. When the empath stops pouring energy into relationships that drain them, life responds. They meet new people whose values resonate with their own. Unexpected opportunities appear. A conversation overheard, a book discovered, a chance encounter, all seem to align perfectly with their new path. Jung saw synchronicity as meaningful coincidence, and for the empath, it feels like confirmation. The universe itself nods in approval when truth is embraced. This stage also invites courage. Living authentically means not everyone will applaud. Some will criticize, others may distance themselves. But here lies the paradox. Losing those who cannot handle your authenticity is not a loss, it's freedom. The empath discovers that the fewer masks they entertain, the lighter their soul feels. Relationships that remain are no longer built on performance but on presence, and that presence nurtures, heals, and empowers. This is the essence of the empath healing journey, moving from exhaustion into empowerment. Still, the empath doesn't become hard or unfeeling. On the contrary, their compassion grows richer. They now know that empathy without boundaries breeds resentment, while empathy with wisdom creates genuine connection. Think of a garden. Without fences, anyone can trample the flowers. But with healthy boundaries, the garden flourishes, attracting only those who appreciate its beauty. The empath's heart becomes such a garden, still soft, still open, but no longer exposed to careless feet. And so, the final reflection is this. When the empath stops forgiving blindly, they awaken. They awaken to their worth, their power, their right to be whole. They understand that life isn't about pleasing everyone else, but about embodying the truth within. Jung would call this individuation, but in simpler terms, it is freedom. Freedom to live without masks, to love without fear, and to walk a path where compassion and authenticity meet. And yet, this is not the end. It's the beginning of a new way of being. The empath now stands at the threshold of a deeper journey, one where self-respect guides every step and truth illuminates every choice. The question that lingers is not whether they can keep forgiving, but whether they can keep honoring themselves. And as this door opens, another story unfolds, the story of living awake, alive, and unafraid of truth. Think about your own life. Where are you still carrying someone else's burden while neglecting your own? Where are you mistaking tolerance for compassion? This is your invitation to stop abandoning yourself. Healing for empaths begins when you decide that your soul deserves the same kindness you so easily give to others. And I want to hear from you. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you stopped forgiving and saw the masks fall? What did that moment teach you? Share your story in the comments. I promise, someone else needs to hear it. If this message resonated, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notifications, and stay with me on this journey into the deeper layers of empath psychology, Jungian insights, and the path of individuation. Every video is another step in learning how to live awake, authentic, and unafraid of truth.